welcome back. Heeg and Kogan, we're going to be analyzing some documents going along with the Industrial Revolution. I think we're almost taking a different approach to it because we're going to be looking at exactly what the train is on and how that's going to impact changes in the map. But we had to start off with this one because it's just so pretty.
It's very pretty.
You gotta love the colors.
Like the little engine that could.
And just as a jumping off point, I mean, it looks like right here, we have the train is being used. We have passenger cars over here.
Yep, this train's leaving the station. The train pulling into the station.
I'm gonna guess right here that this might be something for cargo.
Yep.
Although I see some passenger ones as well, but you know, we're getting the point that at this point the train's being used to move people and cargo.
You can even start foreshadowing the impact the Industrial Revolution, the railroad are going to have on the environment.
Because we're also going to see that, you know, you have your coal cars right behind there as well. But I think the main reason,
If you go back and even, you know, the amount of people that'll wind up being employed by the railroad. You know, a lot of foreshadowing going on.
So we're approaching this from, we're looking at this in the Industrial Revolution, but we know from westward expansion, the Transcontinental Railroad is complete. And we've kind of already beat into people's heads that the benefits are that this is going to be faster, easier, much more efficient. It's going to reduce the cost of shipping. It's going to help the nation expand, and you know, commerce is going to come up quite a bit. But I guess now we're going to look at how, you know, how this is going to improve as and benefit businesses.
How we're going to literally connect the dots.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know, because prior to the Civil War, and I think if you fast forward a little bit ahead, I got a map of like prior. Here we go.
There we
go. This
Perfect.
is kind of what like the railroads looked in red by 1850, and between 1850 and 1860. So this is really the railroads in America prior to the American Civil War. And it was like, all right, Mississippi, we got a rail line running here and there and all these different offshoots. But what the essence was this time is you had a company and you own a rail line. And that was yours. And it was yours to profit off of. And you did not want to allow other companies to put their railroad cars on your train tracks without charging them some sort of a fee. And then we got into like how the railroad helped us win the Civil War, transportation of troops and resupplying them, feeding them, all of these benefits that we kind of get into. But as we have this map in our mind, it starts to lay the groundwork for, all right, we've got this transcontinental railroad now. What are we going to do with it?
Right.
How can I get from point A to point B all the way to point Z out in California now?
Now, when we come up to this unit, you know, the big obstacle that we come up often, and we're not train experts, is the width of the tracks.
Yeah, I mean, it jumps out at me like these two, and like this is called the gauge.
Yep.
The actual gauge is how far apart the two rail lines are. And prior to the Civil War, it was whatever you wanted it to be. It was whatever the train's width was.
Because you're the business owner.
Yes.
You're tailoring it to your needs.
You know, and you look at this, I guess a benefit of having a rail line close together, the railroad ties don't have to be as long. So therefore, you need less wood to build your railroad line, and therefore it's going to cost you less money. But look how narrow that is.
I know.
This is a narrow gauge. It's only about 2 to 2.5 feet. You know, and if I'm standing with my feet together and Mr. Heeg was to push me, what's going to happen?
You're gonna fall
I'm
over.
going to fall over.
Yeah.
So if this train is traveling at any significant rate of speed and comes to a bend, it's going to derail.
That's a really good point.
Yeah,
It's a really
but
good point.
now you've got narrow gauge trains. If this train was to happen to come up on the next track, is it going to fit?
No, it's
No,
not.
you're not going to fit. So now what has to happen is, all right, well, we're transporting lumber.
You're right.
Now you've got
It's not light. It's not light.
You're
you know?
now going to have to pull one train next to another, or as close as you can.
Yeah.
You're going to have people or animals or eventually cranes and stuff.
Sure.
You know, lifting each log of lumber from one train and bringing it over to another. But we just said that transportation was faster, easier, and cheaper. This doesn't sound like it's either of those.
Well,
three.
I guess compared to horse and buggy,
True.
horse and carriage,
True.
you know, everything's perspective. And, you know, of course, you're getting to now where now it's like, okay, we ironed out those kinks, and you know, there's still some improvements that need to be made because I get exactly what you're talking about. Is that loading this from one train to the other is going to take a lot of time. And if you haven't heard this expression, we're going to tell you right now, time is money. And when you're talking about unloading these, you're going to need some pretty big dudes or equipment or machinery moving it from point A to point B. So you're employing people to do this.
Yeah.
So you're wasting time, with the amount of time it's going to take to get there, I shouldn't say wasting, and then and plus you're employing people to do this, where the simple fix is, hey, just make the gauges the same size.
Yeah. So the Pacific Railway Act of 1862 actually said that the Transcontinental Railroad was going to be built with a gauge of 4 feet 8 inches. And that actually winds up becoming the standardized gauge in the country. So all of those little tracks, the solution wasn't, hey, let's move all of this from one train to the next and do it over and over and over and over again. Let's take all the tracks in our nation and standardize the gauge. Whether it was 2 feet, whether it was 6 feet, all those different gauges in between. Let's make them the standard gauge, which is actually, I think it's like 4 feet 8.5 actual standard gauge now. It's every train in the country runs by that particular gauge. Because, okay, is that a lot of work? It's gonna be a lot of work.
Sure.
But once you do it,
Yeah, you're gonna
now
save time.
that train can run on any track in the entire country.
Everything's going to be
And
connected.
if we look at those maps again,
maps, yeah.
as you look at how much rail line go back, we're looking how much rail line. This was 1870.
Yep.
We had the Transcontinental Railroad. Within 20 years, how much more rail is being built in this country, and the amount of commerce that comes out of that. The name Richard Sears, is going to become very popular in American vocabulary, because he was the Jeff Bezos of the time with his Sears Roebuck and Company.
And in the time zones as well.
Yeah.
Which,
And if we didn't standardize gauge, we wouldn't have gotten here.
no.
Because people would have been like, all right, this is good, but I have to spend all this money, waste all this time from going from one train. Now, for us passenger trains in New York, it's like transfer at Jamaica. Okay, I get up, I walk across to the other track, and I get off. But if I'm a bowling ball salesman,
Right.
and I now have 1,000 bowling
Yeah,
balls,
exactly.
then I have to transfer from one train to another, as opposed to just, hey, the simple fix, standardize the gauge, train can go anywhere it wants.
And even, when we're talking about like direct flights or just like a direct line,
Yeah.
Occasionally you have to get off and switch at Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do, you'll catch a couple of people that are just completely annoyed by having to get off of one train and go to another or waiting. And then sometimes there's the risk of running delays.
Yep.
And, the same thing when you're talking about catching connecting flights and all those other things. Again, that whole standardizing of it is going to interconnect them and alleviate a lot of that.
And you notice, even on this map, we have like rails that were nowhere.
Yeah.
But now, as a result of standardization of gauges, it's almost like veins in the body.
Yes.
That everything you could now go from New York to San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles on the same train. Where under this method, you might have to transfer at Boston to New York to Washington, and then Washington to Pennsylvania, whatever you were doing, you had constantly on and off trains.
And since we're talking about how you had business, you had these trains, they're in competition with one another to try and make money, and we're going to see how Vanderbilt used that to kind of eliminate his competition.
Our first captain of industry.
This is pretty cool. How we just took these documents. It's like, all right, there's a lot going on here, but this is what matters
Yeah.
right here. It's just the gauges.
When
It's all
I
how you look
first
at these.
actually showed this to my wife, I'm like, what do you notice? She's like, big trains.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
like, yeah, but look what they're on. She's like,
Right.
tracks, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, that is different, and how such a monumental problem had an easy solution.
And here you have, and this is not by design, a couple of different pictures where you're talking about logging is a particularly big industry.
Mhm.
2 different pictures right there, probably 2 different regions where it's a pretty big industry, and they're going to be one of those industries that benefit from this interconnectedness. Did we want to address anything else with these maps?
No, but we might be able to compare and contrast them.
Oh, hold on. Did we? Oh, we did have
Yeah.
that. Ah. So here we have this one. I don't see too many lines. Nope.
I think that's 1840, 1850.
Yep.
And then by 1880, I mean, it's one of those things in history that, like, what was the greatest innovation in American history? And I'm not going to microchips, whatever, but
Sure.
I mean, the railroad has to be up there. We don't become the nation that we become into the 20th century without the railroad of the 19th century.
And by standardizing those gauges, you now have this network. Where now everything's interconnected. I mean, network should be sounding familiar to people when you're talking about cell phones and cell lines, right? Where you're able to, where that network, where you're talking about a cell phone network is able to connect people. Same here when we're looking.
It's almost
at,
like Verizon uses the similar map to show you all of their coverage areas.
Absolutely.
And they don't cover Arizona. All right, we're good.
All right, good. Well, thank you for watching.